Welcome back to American Arms Channel, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Drake. As you can tell by the title of the video, today we're taking a look at a number 4 buckshot hand load. Specifically, we're going to be loading up the Hornady Swage Lead number 4 buckshot. Now this is a 240 diameter and comes in right around 20.5 grains per pellet. It's a fairly high quality pellet and when buffered seems to provide some excellent patterns. Number 4 buck is an excellent choice for coyotes as well as whitetail. Applying it appropriately at the distances in which it is lethal with a proper choke and a good shooting gun, and of course relying on the man or woman behind the trigger, this load is more than capable of taking small to medium or even large sized whitetail out to 40, 50, and 60 yards. Coyotes, however, could be taken well past that, and should a pattern be good enough, definitely taken out to 85 or 90 yards. However, it is hard to keep a pattern together well enough to kill a coyote at that distance. Anyhow, today we're going to be taking a look at our components, load, and we're also going to head to the range and see how it patterns out. So, let's take a look at our components and get started. To start off, of course, you're going to want to pick some form of number 4 buckshot. I've chosen Hornady. Most commonly on the market, you'll find a nickel-plated or a bare lead pellet. There are copper-plated options available from time to time, and you may be able to manufacture yourself, whether you're pouring your own in a mold or you're buying something like Hornady and doing it. You can powder coat the pellets and get very similar performance or sometimes better performance than nickel plating. All depends upon what you want to do, what specific load you're putting in your specific gun. Again, patterning and load development for your application is going to provide you the best results. However, let's take a look at what I've got going on here. I've chosen the Hornady pellets, so we're all set there. Next up on the line is a hull. I've chosen the fresh Cheddite hull. But today, because I'm going to show you 2 different ways of loading this as far as a finishing crimp, we're going to start with a fresh hull, and we're also going to start with a hull that has got a 6-point star crimp and has been fired once. This won't affect anything other than making it a little bit easier to get that star crimp to form. However, stack and column height on the pellets in this hull with the star crimp is going to come into play, and we'll talk about that later. Next, you'll need to choose a wad. Now, for this load, chosen the Ballistic Products TPS 10 wad. This wad is sort of similar if you've ever seen a flight control wad in that it has a little bit of an elongated skirt. And this cup helps to create a very good gas seal inside the shell and your bore, making sure that you don't experience blow-by under any circumstances and making sure that you get full, complete pressures and burn as it's shoving that heavy shot charge down the bore. So, great wad, very, very good. The TPS does stand for Tungsten Propulsion System. However, even Ballistic Products offers this as a buckshot kit with their number 4 nickel-plated buckshot. So if you're interested in that, that's a great place to start as well, and it'll give you all the components you need. Next up, we're going to take a filler wad. Now, I have chosen to use the 12-gauge 0.700-inch foam filler wad by Ballistic Products. This is a very neat wad. At this time, there isn't a lot of load information about it, but I've been using it extensively in the 10-gauge. And when you are taking a look at it, it's actually going to be bigger. Here's one that I've cut. But what I do is I cut into 4ths or 5ths a single 0.700-inch 12-gauge foam wad. And just using a razor blade, getting a rough 1/4 to 1/5 of its original size really helps you out. And what this is doing is this is acting as a space filler at the bottom of the TPS wad. So it helps keep that shot column up a little bit in the wad to allow a proper crimp. But it also makes a better seating for the pellets. And we'll go over that when I talk about how to stack your buckshot pellets. Lastly, before we crimp, we're going to need an overshot card. Now, even with the fold crimp, you're going to want an overshot card. This is going to do 2 things for us. In a roll crimp, this is going to, of course, crimp off the top of the hull, and it's going to prevent any sort of buffer leak, and is absolutely required in a roll crimp. Now, in a star crimp, it's not perfectly required. However, to get a nice, even, firm crimp and to prevent buffer, you're going to want to put that in there. And last but not least, to fill in the voids between those pellets, we're going to want some buffer. I have chosen Ballistic Products Original Buffer. I really like this stuff. I've not tried their Mix 47 and other products, but this original buffer seems to work very well. Now, for powder, there are a number of options on the market. Really, what's going to give us our best velocity and our best performance out of this 52 pellet load is going to be Blue Dot, and that is what I have chosen here. Alliance Steel can also be used, and your max charge with that is going to be somewhere around 32 or 33 grains. I'm not going to tell you exactly what the max charge is with that because that'll have to be played with, and I haven't done that with this specific load yet and with this wad. But 40 grains of Blue Dot is going to shove this down range anywhere from about 1175 to 1200 foot per second. I'm going to call this load a 1200 foot per second load. However, reality and different barrel lengths and atmospheric conditions and elevation above sea level are going to play a big factor in the average velocity. So we'll call it a 1200 foot per second load, but we're going to know that we're going to be well north of 1100 feet per second and have a much better time at retaining that energy downrange because we've got a nice balanced load as far as pellet count, shot column height, and velocity are going.
Now, some helpful tools when you're loading up this specific load are definitely going to be some sort of ramrod or ball starter. This is just a ball starter I picked up at a flea market from a guy who was selling stuff for muzzleloading components. It's supposed to be for a 45 to 50 caliber muzzleloader. However, I've found it extremely useful for seating wads. It also is helpful for tamping shot, which in this case, these large number 4 buckshot pellets do need a little bit of a tamp here and there while you're loading up the shell. Loading this buckshot hull is not as quick or as efficient in time as a standard birdshot load, but it is very rewarding and can be a lot of fun. So obviously we've got all of our components lined up here and ready, but we also are going to want some form of dipper. Now this is going to help us, of course, throw our powder into the powder measure, but more importantly, this is going to allow us to measure out the amount of buffer we need. So with this load, we're going to use 5 cc's of buffer, but we'll cover that again when we get to that point. You'll see here I have pellets on a primer tray. I have used some blue tape. You can use whatever kind of tape you want. Masking your blue tape would definitely be the most handy because you can pull it off easily. But count out 52 spaces and use that as kind of your dipper. I sort of just scoop into the box where I have my pellets stored and brush off all the excess and fill any voids. That way I'm not counting pellets every single time. And no, I'm not the first person to think about this. This is a whole trick that you can utilize with all sorts of buckshot pellets or any sort of pellet, really, if you're wanting to get exact counts with your shot throw. A 209 shot shell primer tray will also work really well for larger shot than number 4 buck, such as single-aught, double-aught, etc. But this works just about perfect for this 240 diameter number 4 buck. While not necessary, a powder funnel is absolutely recommended and definitely is going to help you out with throwing those powder charges, especially when we get to a pre-crimped or once fired hull where we have a fold crimp potentially obscuring our access to the mouth of the hull. And lastly, some form of a pointy, pokey little tool. I've been using a pen and it's been very handy, and we'll cover that in a second. But really what this is going to be used for is when you lose a pellet in your shot column, when you're trying to organize your pellets as you fill up this hull, is having something to just get in between the pellets and give them a slight push or flick or nudge in the direction you need them to go is definitely going to help you out. So obviously, really simple tool, and other than the roll crimp tool on the end of our drill or drill press, these are the tools that are going to help you out load this up the most efficiently. It can be done without a few of these, but these will definitely help. First, we're going to throw our powder charge. So I'm going to grab my handy dandy little powder funnel here, put it in my fresh hull, and dump my powder in. A couple taps, make sure that powder went in. And of course, we're going to check. Yes, sirree, we got the powder down in there. Pretty easy with a big open 10 gauge case mouth. We're going to set that aside real quick. And I find it easiest when we're doing filler wads to insert your filler wad and fully seat it in the wad before putting it in the shot shell. So I'm going to drop my filler piece in there, my little foam filler piece. Again, I've not found a lot of difference in between the cut into quarters or cut into fifths method with the 0.700 inch foam filler wad, the 12 gauge I should say, filler wad, but either one will work. I have noticed, however, the thinner one will probably give you a better crimp on the fold crimp hull, whereas you'll get a little bit more cushion on the round crimp. It's not going to affect pressures or anything, so the roll crimp is definitely going to be blind to doing whatever size, but you do want to do a quarter cut or a fifth cut on that. And when I seat it here with my little ramrod, I'm just going to seat it, and I've actually, to help provide it a small dimple for the bottom pellet to rest in, I've taken the pen and just kind of poked it. Next, we'll just seat it in our hull and ram it down until it stays. Make sure it's in there. Very nice. Now we just need to add shot. Now, before we go willy-nilly into throwing pellets into a hull and wad, we're going to want to understand how these pellets need to stack in order to, one, provide a very efficient and organized shot column, and two, provide us a very well patterning shot column. So the bigger the pellet, the more space or void there is in between each pellet. This also creates an issue where the same space does not automatically organize when the shot charge is dumped. So if I'm taking 52 of these pellets and I'm putting in a space of a 10 gauge hull, that space on the hull itself is about, in a Chenite hull at least, about 780, maybe a touch under, and that's the inside diameter of that hull. Now when we add a wad to that, and this is a very crude wad, what we're actually doing is we are reducing that inside diameter, in this case, down to around 0.770, which is nominally 0.005 closer or tighter than the actual bore diameter of the 10 gauge. So we don't actually have as much space for all those pellets. And if you remember, that number 4 buck is equaling 6mm or 0.240 inch. So if we think about it, how many of these guys can we fit across in a straight space? Well, you do about 3. So you're going to have a very tight quarter directly across. But because we're working with a 3-dimensional cylinder, we have to stack these appropriately. So if I can fit 3 of these guys across inside that wad, well, I can also fit several on the peripheral, right? So you'd be able to think that, okay, I can get 6 around here and 1 in the center. Well, that's not really the case, especially with the concept that this wad is more of a beaker shape or a test tube shape at the bottom, where we've got a concave and diminishing internal diameter. So in theory, you'd be able to do this, but in reality, you can't. And that's just because of the components we're using. Now, if we were using something like just a straight up gas seal and then maybe a fiber wad, now we have much more room and can shove that down the barrel. However, that shot's going to contact the barrel. It's going to cause streaking in the barrel. It's also going to cause erratic outside diameter flyers. So maximizing the payload in that scenario, even if we could maintain the velocity, is still going to be a problem. So really, we have the best solution here by just organizing the stack appropriately in our wad like this. So our wad is going to come down and have this little cup, and we're filling that with a piece of foam here. So the way we're going to stack this is we're actually going to put 1 pellet in, and then, and I'll give you guys a circle shot here, we're actually going to surround it with 5 pellets. So that will look something like this. And then we put another ball on top of that, and we surround that with 5 pellets, and so on and so forth. We skip one, we do 5 pellets, one on top, and then we keep going until our final stack of 52 pellets is 5 around the perimeter with no center pellet above or below. And this fills our wad in our shot shell hull. And that was absolutely terrible diagramming, but hopefully it will give you an idea. But again, we're going to put a first pellet in, the bottom pellet, then we're going to stack 5 around it. We're going to drop another center pellet, 5 around it. Center pellet, 5 around it. You're going to do that about 4 times, and then you're going to skip a center pellet, do 5 around it, center pellet, and then you're going to end up with 5 pellets with no center pellet to organize. And that's okay, because when we get to that top, now we're going to drop 5 cc's of buffer in, and that's going to keep those top pellets in place even when we tamp down that buffer and put the next 2.5 cc, because you can't just pour a full 5 cc's in all at once. And it's going to hold in place. We're going to put our overshot card, and then at that point, even if they move a little bit, it's not a huge deal. They're not going to fly around just because of that. But this is going to provide us a very, very well organized shot column that is going to produce a well patterning and very efficient shot shell. So we've got our hull here and we've got our pellets. Let's see if we can drop it in while I'm doing this on camera. We're going to take our first pellet and drop it right on in there. We're going to try and center it. Next, I'm going to grab 3 to 5 pellets, and I'm going to start dropping them in, trying to organize them around the original on the bottom. And we've pretty much accomplished that, so I'm going to put the tamper down in there. And we've pretty much got the first set there. And this is much more difficult with me doing this on camera than anything else. So after playing with that just a second, and of course not having the camera in my way, we can see there that we've got a nice organized stack. So now that we've got that organized, fairly decent, we're going to drop another center pellet in there. And now we're going to continue that trend of dropping 5 pellets around that center pellet. And every time we get a row in, we're going to tamp that down so that we keep stacking it up. And now I'm going to keep doing this. Now that I've reached a 4th or 5th row, I'm actually going to skip putting in a center pellet, and I'm going to just drop them in the peripheral. I wish I could show you this effectively, but it's kind of hard. And this is where having something pokey like a pen or a punch or anything like that is going to be handy, because you're going to want to try and keep that one out of the center, and then we're going to tamp it down so it'll stay in place. And then we're actually going to drop the next one on the center of the stack, and again put its 5 around the peripheral, and we can resume our gentle tamp and dropping a center pellet and 5. And once again, we've reached the top of the stack now, so we are going to actually just drop our 5 in, and then we're going to use our poker, our pen, or whatever we've got to get the shot column organized as such. So I'm going to take my 2.5 cc dipper here, and I'm going to dip it in until it's level and dump that right in. I'm going to tap until I see the top of the top stack of pellets. I'm going to take another scoop, dump that right in, and once again do the same until I see the top of the pellet stack. And we can see the pellet stack starting to emerge from the buffer there. So I'm going to kind of tap it so that evens out. I'm going to take my labeled overshot card, since we're doing a roll crimp on this specific hull, and I'm going to tamp that down on top of our shot charge. Next, I'm going to take my roll crimper, and because we're going on a fresh hull here and I've not yet started on any hulls with this roll crimper as far as this loading session goes, it is cold. So I'm going to let it spin on top until I feel it start to set down. That way we've got the plastic warm, we've got the roller warm, and it will provide for a much better crimp. We're going to walk to try and keep it as level as possible. Now, if you're using a shell vise from Ballistic Products as well as a drill press, you're going to have a much better time. But I'm going to spin up, feel it start to fold over, and then I'm going to start to apply downward pressure. Started to twist the hull here from my grip, which I've held firmly, and there we go. Actually, a fairly even crimped number 4 52 pellet 1200 foot per second 10 gauge 3.5 inch magnum buckshot load. Now let's take a look at the same process, but we're going to actually do a star crimp this time. Well, there we have it. Our two different loads here. The only difference, of course, being what kind of crimp we applied. This one turned out rather ugly, but my crimper is not exactly set up on my Mech 600 Junior to run this load appropriately. So we got a bit of swirling and overlapping here, but it'll work and it'll stay tight. I've got a bunch of more of these loaded up with the star crimp as well, and as well as the roll crimp here. So the roll crimp's really beautiful, no bulging. The star crimp is a hit or miss. You got to adjust your press to work appropriately, but she's a little bit lumpy and might cause trouble feeding in tight chambered guns, or cause a little bit extra force if you're putting it into a break action like a single shot or a double barrel, or of course a pump action might cause a little bit of a insertion problem, but I digress. We're also using a once fired hull here, so it doesn't look perfectly pristine. But those two right there, we're going to take them to the pattern board and a couple of their brethren and see what we get out of the Gold 10 Light. All right, let's go find out. All right, so we're out here on the range. Let's get these patterned. I've got the pattern board set up at about 18 yards and about 30 yards. It's not laser verified, guys, so this is just off of reference. We're going to show you the target as it's shot, and you're also going to see the cycling in the Gold 10. Again, the only difference between these two loads that we're going to pattern today is going to be whether they have a star crimp or if they have a roll crimp. They all have overshot cards. They're all buffered with 5 cc's of Ballistic Products original buffer. You just watched me throw some of them together. So let's throw them downrange now and see what these 52 pellet 2.5 ounce 10 gauge number 4 buck loads can do. Star crimp to start. And now the roll crimp. All right, ladies and gents, so here's our two different shells fired. The left is the star crimp and the right is the roll crimp. These Cheddite hulls like to make that 5-point star formation, so that's just one little intricacy of the Cheddite hull, but that is the roll crimp, and this is the 6-point star crimp. No pressure signs. Nice shell. Felt really good firing these. Okay, so you saw I hit the paper, but let's go over it. I'll cut these down so that every pellet that hit the board is represented on these cutouts. So here's the core of our pattern, and we've got a couple of flyers, and this, of course, is the first shot taken with the star crimp. So we've got some flyers here. Could that be pellet stack? Could that be you know, an erratic part of the star crimp releasing the pellets down the bore? Maybe. But let's take a look at the rest of the targets and see if we can make any sort of correlation. Again, so there's about 18-20 yards with the improved modified choke out of the Browning Gold 10 Light, and that is a Carlson's improved modified clays. So that is their choke tube. It's a 750 constriction, really tight pattern core right there, and of course we've got some stringing up and to the left, but every pellet, just about every pellet, made it onto this board. All right, so this swath here, this is our 30-yard pattern. We've got still a really great core. You're not going to shoot at a deer or a coyote with this at 30 to 40 yards and not get at least 5 pellets in the vitals. If we look at that core, I can cover my hand, which is going to make roughly a 6-inch to 8-inch circle, and we've got somewhere around 20 to 25 pellets just in that box. So really tight core, but we're starting to see we're getting a lot of pellets around the peripheral. It's expanding and it's not super even, but it also is hard to try and figure out how even of a pattern you have with such a low pellet count. Bigger pellets, lower counts, it's going to be a little bit more jagged to the eyes, but really this is a solid pattern, and if we just take the core 10-inch circle here, that is incredible. You could kill just about anything that's the size of a goose and up with that out to 30 yards, no problem. Of course, the application of number 4 buck at that distance is a little bit gratuitous, except for on larger animals, but this amount of gratuitous violence is going to shut down any 4- or 2-legged creature that you might have to dispatch with great haste. So even with the star crimp hull here, we're looking at two about 18-20 yard and a 30-yard pattern that are exceptional, and I would say 40 yards completely reasonable. 50, we'll have to shoot it and find out, but really nice pattern. Roll crimp. All right, so now we've got a little bit less erraticacy here. Is that a word? Erraticacy? A little bit less erratic of a pattern, and we've got one significant flyer, but I counted them up a minute ago. Unfortunately, I didn't bring a pen or a Sharpie of any type to the range today. That was a big mistake, but we've got a really solid core here, incredible, and I would expect that out of an improved modified at 15 to 20 yards. It should just be like a slug hitting the target, one solid mass, and we've got double up on holes and stuff. So even if I only count 49 or 50 pellets and I'm missing 2 for some reason, they're probably somewhere in here where pellets stacked up and hit in the same place. So that's an exceptional pattern. Let's see how it did at 35. Excuse me, 30. The core is right about here. We've got just about every pellet on the pattern board, but we've got a big hole here and a big hole here. So a little bit of a question mark as to what happened. If we compare that to this 35-yard pattern with the star crimp, we can see we've got a super solid core, and here we've got a usable core. Could that be the shell or the stack? I think it would be more reasonable to compare these two across 5 shots, but I'm not going to do that today in the interest of time and brevity of the video. I think these are about equal. All the pellets are in the same size area, so if I overlay this target swatch with that target swatch, we can see that we're still in the same box. We're still in about a 2 by 2 square here, which is a 24 by 24, which puts us well within our 30-inch circle. Now, patterning buckshot, we probably want to be within a 12-inch circle. So if we make a 12-inch circle and we go from here to here, we've got a very solid pattern core, and from here to here, we've got the same. So we're going to end up with around the same pellet count. It's just this looks a little bit more even. But again, this is 1 shot versus 1 shot. It would take probably 5 to 10 shots of each at the same distance with the same gun and same choke to find out your average pellet count in that box, and then visually confirm that evenness of pattern. But overall, we've got some excellent patterns here with this number 4 Buckshot Handload, and I really, really like it. I like the roll crimp a little bit better because it feeds more reliably in the gold. It's easier to put in the double barrel, and it's a much easier hull to crimp down and not worry about bulging out. Also, the fold crimp seems to spike a little bit of pressure and fatigue the hull at the brass, and I have had several once-fired hulls that have had the buckshot run through them before actually shear in a circle around just above the brass and send the whole load downrange as a cut shell, like a big slug. So that's not ideal, so the roll crimp is going to prevent that. I think the roll crimp's superior, but if you get your loading technique and your Mech 600 Junior or whatever press you're using for your 10-gauge fold crimp set up appropriately, I think you're more than going to be happy with what you're going to see as results as far as patterns, reliability, and general overall quality of your shell. Ladies and gentlemen, so bonus pattern at 50 yards. We're walking up to it now. Nice. Very nice. Pretty even. Pretty damn even. Gun went off, bead was about right here. Center of pattern seems to be about right here. If we want to draw a 30-inch circle, that's about from here, just on the inside of the pattern board, around, and we've got a ton of pellets in that area. Just an absolute ton. You know, this is on par with what I've seen out of the Warwolf loads as well, with their T and F shot, which have a slightly higher pellet count at the same weight of charge. So really, really great. I trust this to be a 50-yard deer load, and I trust this to be about a 60-yard coyote load, because it's going to take a few less to kill a coyote with these 240 caliber 20.5 grain pellets. So if we look at the vitals of a deer, and we just put the vitals of a deer right where I aimed, we've got at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-ish, 7 or 8-ish pellets in the vital zone of a deer. So I would say, you know, medium to larger deer, smaller deer, you know, whether it's a yearling or it's a doe or maybe even a good sized buck out to 50 yards, this number 4 buckshot load is going to have the energy to go in and really put them down hard. And it has a bit of forgiveness. If I aimed a little bit low or a little bit high, we'd still get a good number of pellets in it. And of course, if we zero this baby with a red dot on top of the gun, well, hell, that 50-yard shot and in is going to be absolutely easy peasy, lemon squeezy on this one. Once again, guys, thanks for watching. God bless. Keep your powder dry. I'll see you in the next video.